never thought my life would reach a point where I'd feel more like an afterthought than a mother, but here I am, 67 years old, sitting in a quiet kitchen with a slobber-covered tennis ball on the floor and a labradoodle snoring at my feet, wondering how I got reduced to the family's unpaid dog sitter while my daughter posts beach selfies from Santorini with captions like "making memories with my people." My people. And I wasn't one of them. I didn't even know they were going until 2 days before they left. That's the part that still stings, more than the dog hair on my pants or the passive-aggressive thank you note she left next to a half-eaten muffin. I had talked to Melissa the week before. She asked how my knees were holding up, if the new mattress had helped my back, and if I needed anything from Costco, like she cared. And not once did she mention a word about the family trip. It wasn't until she dropped by with Baxter and a travel bag for the dog that it hit me like a slap. "We're headed to Greece for 2 weeks," she said breezily, already half out the door. "I know it's last minute, but you're the only one we trust with him." That was it. No invitation, no consideration, no "do you want to come?" Or even "would you be okay with this?" Just a fait accompli handed to me like a leash. And like a fool, I took it. I didn't speak up. I didn't say no. I just nodded and smiled and said, "Of course, because that's what I've always done." Be helpful. Be available. Be convenient. And what did that get me? A seat on the sidelines while my daughter sipped wine in white linen dresses, took boat rides with her in-laws, and made core memories that didn't include the woman who taught her how to braid her hair, who stayed up nights sewing her prom dress when we couldn't afford the one she wanted, who held her when her first marriage fell apart like it broke me too. I wasn't angry at first. I was numb. I fed the dog. I took him on walks. I cleaned up his accidents when the thunder scared him half to death. I texted her updates like some hired help. And she answered with emojis. I think that's when the shift started, not a loud crack, but a soft click. Something in me, something that had been dormant for years, started to stir. Because the truth is, this wasn't the first time I'd been treated like a background character in my own daughter's life. It was just the most obvious. There had been birthdays missed, excuses made, plans rescheduled. When she bought her new house, I found out on Facebook. When she had her second child, I was called after the in-laws had already visited. Every time, I told myself it wasn't personal. She's busy, I'd say. She's overwhelmed. She means well. But eventually, all those excuses start to sound like lies you tell yourself so the hurt doesn't dig in too deep. I started looking around my house and seeing it for what it was, a holding pen. A place where I waited to be useful again. Waited for a phone call, a request, a holiday invitation. Waited for someone to remember I existed outside of service. And I remembered something I hadn't thought of in years. Back when I was younger, before the kids, I used to dream about travel. Not just road trips or tourist buses, but real travel. I used to read National Geographic and clip out photos of blue lagoons, rainforests, and far-off places with names I couldn't pronounce but longed to whisper into a ticket counter. But life happened. Kids, bills, responsibilities. And somewhere along the way, I decided my turn would come later. I put those dreams on a shelf and dusted off practicality instead. Well, I've waited long enough. That night, I sat on the couch, Baxter asleep beside me, and I opened my laptop. I typed luxury vacations for solo travelers over 60. Not budget cruises, not visiting relatives, but something just for me. Something bold, indulgent, and completely out of character. And there it was, the Maldives. Turquoise water, overwater bungalows, a picture of a woman not much younger than me floating in a private pool with a blissed-out smile on her face. I could practically hear the waves. I clicked book now before I could talk myself out of it. I used part of the savings I'd squirreled away for family emergencies, and realized this counted. I was the emergency. I didn't tell Melissa. I didn't explain. When they came back and swung by to pick up the dog, I simply handed him over with a smile and said, "I'll be away for a little while myself." She blinked, surprised, but didn't ask. Just said, "Oh, okay. Thanks again." That was it. No curiosity. No counter question. No awareness that something had shifted. And maybe that's for the best. Because this isn't about her anymore. This is about me. I hadn't bought a swimsuit in over 20 years. The last one I owned had sagging elastic and a floral print I'm pretty sure my grandmother would have worn in the 70s. The thought of stepping into a store with fluorescent lighting and teenage clerks nearly made me close the browser tab and cancel the whole idea. But then I remembered how Melissa had posted a photo of herself in a designer bikini next to a cliffside pool with the caption, "You can't pour from an empty cup." And I laughed out loud, not because it was funny, but because I'd spent most of my life pouring from a dry pitcher while she drank like a queen. So, I took a deep breath, ordered a sleek black one-piece with a wraparound cover-up, and dared the little voice in my head to talk me out of it. It tried, but I hit purchase anyway. And that became my theme for the next 2 weeks, do the thing anyway. When I called the travel agent and she asked if I'd like a massage package or a guided snorkeling excursion, I said, why not both? Even though a tiny part of me whispered, you've never done anything like this. When the suitcase arrived, I packed it full of sundresses I hadn't worn in years because they'd felt too bright for someone my age. But this time, I looked in the mirror and thought, too bright for who? The day I left a note for Melissa, not because I owed her one, but because I didn't want to disappear completely. It was short. Gone for a little reset. Don't worry about the house. I'll be unreachable. Love, Mom. I didn't hear from her. Not that day. Not the next. And it didn't sting the way I expected. It confirmed what I'd known all along, she didn't check in unless she needed something. When the plane took off, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not excitement, exactly. It was deeper than that. It was permission. Permission to exist just for myself. Permission to live a story that didn't orbit around someone else's needs. The resort was almost too perfect. A welcome drink was placed in my hand before I even finished checking in. My overwater bungalow had a glass floor section where I could see the fish swim beneath me. The air smelled like sea salt and orchids. For a moment, I felt like I had stepped into someone else's fantasy, until I remembered, this was my dream. One I had never allowed myself to speak aloud until someone else's selfishness finally broke the silence. I spent the first day doing nothing. No guilt, no multitasking, just nothing. I lay on a lounge chair with a book I never opened, letting the sun warm my skin and the breeze lull me into something close to peace. By the second day, something began to shift. Not dramatically, just subtle flickers of awareness. I caught my reflection in the mirror and didn't flinch. I walked to breakfast barefoot and didn't rush. I struck up a conversation with a Canadian woman named Anne who was also traveling solo after a rough divorce, and we talked for 2 hours like old friends. No judgment, no comparison, just presence. In the past, I would have worried about how I looked, what people thought, how I measured up. But here, far from anyone who knew me as just Mom, I got to be someone else. Or maybe, for the first time in decades, I got to be myself. I began to notice how often I apologized, out of habit, not necessity. For taking up space, for asking questions, for being seen, and each time I caught myself, I whispered silently, stop. Just that, stop. I had apologized enough in my life. For things that weren't wrong. For wanting rest. For needing love, for daring to admit I was tired. I didn't owe the world more apologies. By the 4th day, I started waking up early, not out of obligation, but out of eagerness. I'd sit on the deck with a cup of fresh coffee and watch the sun crawl out of the ocean like it was greeting me. Like I mattered, like I existed outside of utility. And slowly, the grief I'd been carrying started to melt, not disappear, not magically resolve, but soften. I wasn't angry anymore. I was clear. Melissa hadn't invited me to her life because she didn't see me as a person. She saw me as a function. A convenience. The same way she saw her housekeeper, her delivery man, or the neighbor who brought in her packages when she traveled. But I was done being convenient. Convenience doesn't book herself a trip to the Maldives. Convenience doesn't walk barefoot on white sand at 6 a.m. or order lobster just because she feels like it. A woman does that. A whole woman. And I was her again. The 6th night, there was a live music night at the beach bar. I almost skipped it, but something in me, curiosity, maybe, pulled me there. I sat alone at a small table under string lights, sipping something fruity I couldn't pronounce. The air was soft, the music low, and for the first time in years, I felt safe inside my own life. No one needed anything from me. And yet, I had never felt so full. Coming home was different this time. Usually, I returned to my house with that slow, sinking feeling, a mix of silence, dust, and that lingering question, who would notice if I disappeared? But not this time. This time I opened my front door and stepped inside with the quiet calm of someone who had nothing to prove, no one to impress, and no more space for guilt in her suitcase. My house still smelled faintly of lavender and old wood, and for once, it didn't feel like a waiting room. It felt like mine, not a place to serve others, but a place to simply exist in. I unpacked slowly, savoring the sound of my own footsteps on the floor, the way the afternoon light painted stripes across the living room. The silence wasn't heavy anymore, it was mine. And I wasn't rushing to fill it. I let it stretch, let it settle. It wasn't until the next morning that Melissa texted. Not a "how was your trip?" or "did you make it back safe?" but simply, "can we talk?" No emojis this time, no exclamation points. I stared at the message for a full 10 minutes before setting the phone down without answering. It wasn't out of spite. I just needed time to think. To remember that I didn't owe an immediate response to someone who had spent years responding to me only when it was convenient. I made breakfast. I watered the plants. I sat on the porch and let the cool air kiss my skin. I reminded myself that this was the life I had chosen to return to, not a life of cold shoulders, but one of deliberate peace. When I finally texted her back, I kept it short. "I'm home. I have time next week if you'd like to come by." She responded within minutes. "How about Tuesday?" And just like that, it was set. I didn't panic. I didn't clean the house like a madwoman or rehearse excuses. I let it be what it would be. I had just spent 12 days in one of the most beautiful places on earth reminding myself that I mattered, and I wasn't about to let that unravel in a single afternoon. Tuesday came fast. She was on time, for once. Pulled up in her spotless SUV, wearing her usual mix of casual and curated, holding a coffee she'd probably grabbed on the way. She stepped inside and looked around like she hadn't been here in years, and maybe, in some ways, she hadn't. Not really. I offered her tea. She declined, sat on the edge of the couch like it might bite her. There was a pause, thick as syrup. Then she said, "I didn't realize you were going on a trip." I nodded. "I didn't realize you were either, until you dropped your dog off on my porch." Her eyes flickered. "Okay, fair." Another pause. She tried again. "You didn't tell me you were going to the Maldives." I sipped my tea. "You didn't ask." And just like that, the power shifted. Not because I was trying to control the moment, but because I wasn't trying to smooth it over anymore. I let the discomfort hang in the air like humidity. She fidgeted, picked at her sleeve. "I guess I just assumed." She trailed off. "You assumed I'd always be here," I finished. Not cruelly, just plainly. She nodded slowly. "Yeah, I did." For the first time, she looked not defensive, not annoyed, but unsure. Like maybe she was seeing something new. Or maybe something old that she'd long forgotten. "I didn't mean to leave you out," she said. "The Greece trip. It was last minute. Ryan's parents booked it." I smiled faintly. "And you didn't think to invite me? Or even tell me?" She opened her mouth, closed it. "I didn't think you'd want to come." I laughed gently. "Melissa, I raised you while working full-time and caring for your father through chemo. I think I could handle a vacation." She flushed. "That's not what I meant." I know. More silence. But it wasn't angry. Just real. Then she asked, "Was it nice? The trip?" I could have kept it surface level. Could have said it was fine. But I didn't. "It was incredible," I said. I felt like a person again. Not a background character. Her eyes welled up. "I didn't expect that." "I'm sorry," she whispered. I believed her. But I didn't need the apology to move forward. "I'm not angry anymore," I told her. "But I'm different. And I won't go back to how things were. I've given too much of myself without return. That stops now." She nodded. "I don't want it to be like that either." And that's where we left it. Not fully healed, not reconciled, but acknowledged. And sometimes, that's enough. After she left, I sat back down in the same chair where I'd sipped my tea. The sun was lower now, casting soft shadows on the floor. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt steady. And more than that, I felt free. Life after the Maldives didn't go back to normal, because normal was gone, and I didn't want it back anyway. Something in me had shifted, subtly but permanently, like a tide that had turned while no one was watching. It wasn't dramatic, there were no fireworks or announcements, but I moved through my days with a different posture now, less hunched, less hurried, more deliberate. I no longer lived in wait. I no longer sat by the phone hoping for the ping of someone else's urgency. I had finally unclenched the part of me that was always braced for disappointment, and in its place grew something unfamiliar but deeply welcome: stillness. I began saying yes to myself more often. I said yes to the long route home, just because the trees were pretty. I said yes to the cooking class at the community center, even though I hadn't tried a new recipe in years and the idea of kneading dough with strangers once would have terrified me. I said yes to the quiet moments, the walks with no destination, the silence I used to find suffocating that now felt like a gift. I even found myself humming in the mornings again, that low tuneless hum I used to make when I was alone in the kitchen before the kids were up, before I forgot what it felt like to move without obligation. And the more I leaned into this new rhythm, the more I realized how much I'd shrunk myself over the years, not all at once, but inch by inch, until I barely took up space in my own life. I had said no so many times. No to invitations because I was on call for my family. No to buying myself something beautiful because it felt indulgent. No to travel, to hobbies, to the tiniest flickers of personal joy because there was always something more practical, more important, more selfless I could be doing instead. But where did all that selflessness get me? Alone with a dog I didn't ask for while my daughter made memories without me. And no, I wasn't bitter. That would have meant I still wanted something from her. What I felt now was something closer to clarity. And with that clarity came boundaries I never thought I had in me. Melissa did come around more after our talk, but not in the same way. She came with awareness now, almost a tentativeness, as if testing whether I would still bend the way I always had. But I didn't. When she asked me to help with the kids for a weekend so she and Ryan could reset, I smiled and said, I have plans. I didn't explain what kind of plans. I didn't scramble to rearrange anything. I just left it at that. When she pushed, gently, with a tilt of the head and a tone that used to work like magic, I didn't budge. And to my surprise, she didn't throw a fit. She just accepted it. Maybe she's learning, too. I started noticing how often women my age get praised for being accommodating, for being low maintenance, for being easy. And I started to wonder why we were so celebrated for needing so little. What kind of system rewards you for becoming invisible? For asking less, taking less, expecting less? I had done all of that for years, and all it got me was exhaustion and resentment. But now, I was learning to receive without apologizing. I booked another trip, this time to Sedona. A solo retreat for women in their 60s, focused on reflection, hiking, and honest conversation. I didn't tell Melissa until 2 days before I left. She raised an eyebrow when I mentioned it. Another vacation? She asked. I smiled. Yes, I'm just getting started. I could see the questions behind her eyes, the unspoken confusion. Who is this version of my mother? Where did the woman who was always available go? And I hoped she would sit with those questions, because the answers weren't for me to provide. I had spent enough time narrating my worth to others. Let them figure it out now. During that Sedona trip, something happened I didn't expect. One evening, after a group meditation, I found myself crying, not from sadness, but from the sheer relief of finally seeing myself as someone worth showing up for. I sat under a wide desert sky, the kind that makes you feel tiny and infinite all at once, and I whispered out loud, "Thank you." Not to anyone in particular, but maybe to the universe, or to the woman I was becoming. She had taken a long time to arrive, but she was here now. And she wasn't going anywhere. When I came back home, the house felt different again, not because it had changed, but because I had. I moved through it with ownership now, not as someone filling space, but as someone who had claimed it. I hung new curtains, rearranged furniture, painted the guest room in a color I loved but never dared use before. I even bought new sheets, not because anyone was visiting, but because I deserved softness. And something amazing happened when I stopped living for other people's convenience. My world didn't fall apart. The sun still rose. The phone still rang. The people who mattered stayed close. And Melissa, slowly, cautiously, began relating to me in a new way. She still stumbled sometimes, defaulted to old habits, but she caught herself. And I noticed. I never said anything, but I saw it. When she offered to bring dinner without asking me to watch the kids. When she sat with me on the porch just to talk, not to unload. When she hugged me at the end of a visit and didn't ask for anything. Maybe she's changing too. I don't expect perfection. I don't expect redemption. I just expect respect now. And that expectation has changed everything. I wake up every day now with a sense of calm that isn't dependent on what someone else does or doesn't do. My joy no longer hinges on their recognition. My peace isn't a prize someone else can hand me. It's mine. I earned it. And no one gets to take it away. I don't know what comes next. Maybe more travel. Maybe more silence. Maybe a garden I finally have the time and care to grow. But whatever it is, it will be mine. Not something I do to earn love. Not a performance. Just a life, fully lived, with my name on it. I used to think my quiet life meant something was missing, that the space left behind by the absence of invitations, visits, or frantic family chaos was a void to be filled. But now, I see that quiet isn't emptiness. It's clarity. And with each passing week, that clarity has sharpened into something I never expected at my age: joy. Not the wild kind that demands to be captured in photographs, not the kind that needs external validation or a Facebook caption to feel real, but a private, rooted joy that hums beneath my skin and whispers, "You've made it. You've finally arrived in your own life." I've started doing things slowly now, not out of fatigue, but out of reverence. I stir my morning coffee like it matters, like that little swirl of steam is an offering. I water my plants with care, talk to them like they understand. I write in a journal most days, even if it's only a few lines, small thoughts, soft reflections, observations about the way the light moves across the floor at 3 p.m. Or how the birds outside my window seem to follow their own rituals without asking anyone's permission. And more than anything, I've stopped waiting. Waiting for someone to remember me. Waiting for an apology. Waiting for a holiday invite or a thank you card or a crumb of validation to prove I'm still needed. I'm not needed in the way I used to be. That's true, but I'm still whole, still valuable, still here, and that, I've realized, is enough. I joined a book club, an in-person one, not just something on a screen, and we meet every other Thursday at a little coffee shop tucked into the back of an old bookstore. Most of us are over 60. We talk about characters, yes, but also about life, about regrets, about how long it takes to learn some lessons and how some wounds never stop whispering even after they've healed. There's something sacred about being with women who carry the same invisible bruises. We don't compare. We just see each other. One night, after the group ended and the shop was closing, a woman named Frances, widowed, sharp-tongued, heartbroken over a daughter who stopped speaking to her 5 years ago, looked at me and said, "You have a piece about you I haven't seen before. I hope I get there." And I smiled, not because I had advice, but because I understood. Because I had been where she was, aching, reaching, rationalizing. And now I wasn't. Not because Melissa and I had reconciled in some storybook way. We hadn't. Our relationship had simply settled into something calmer, less performative. We still spoke, we still met, but it was no longer on her terms alone. I stopped showing up every time she called. I stopped accepting last-minute plans as if they were favors. And I stopped contorting myself into a version of mom that was more about utility than humanity. She noticed, I think. There was a shift in her tone, in her eyes. Less assumption, more caution, sometimes even respect. But the real shift wasn't in her. It was in me. I no longer needed her to see me clearly in order to feel seen. I saw myself. And that gaze was finally enough. There was one morning, a few weeks ago, when she called. Said she had an emergency at work and asked if I could pick up the kids from school. My gut instinct kicked in, the old reflex to drop everything, rush in, save the day. But then I remembered. I had plans. I was meeting a friend for a museum exhibit I'd been looking forward to for weeks. And I said no, kindly, but firmly. "I'm sorry, I can't today. I have something on my calendar." The silence on the other end was thick. She didn't argue. She just said, "Okay. I'll figure it out." And she did. The world didn't collapse. The kids weren't stranded. And I got to spend the afternoon walking through galleries with someone who asked me what I thought about the art, not about dinner or carpool or if I'd seen where the dog leash was. That afternoon stayed with me. Not because it was extraordinary, but because it was mine. And in it, I saw the shape of a life that no longer orbited around being available, but around being alive. There was a time when I would have felt selfish for that. When I believed love meant sacrificing without question, showing up without rest, and staying silent when your heart was screaming. But I don't believe that anymore. Now I believe that real love includes yourself in the circle. That it draws a line not out of cruelty, but out of clarity. That it says, I matter too, and means it. And because of that, I've stopped feeling guilty. I've stopped second-guessing every boundary, every no, every moment I choose myself. I've stopped explaining my choices to people who never explained their treatment of me. And as a result, I've found peace, not the performative kind that looks good in holiday cards, but the kind that lets you sleep at night and wake up with purpose. I don't know where the road leads from here. Maybe Melissa and I will grow closer. Maybe we won't. Maybe one day she'll understand everything. Maybe she never will. But either way, I'm not waiting on her growth to validate mine. I'm moving forward with or without her timeline. And that's not abandonment. That's survival. That's grace. That's finally, mercifully, freedom. The beautiful thing about building a life that's finally yours is realizing just how much of it was spent trying to earn space in someone else's. I didn't fully understand that until I caught myself one morning reaching for my phone to text Melissa a picture of a flower blooming in my backyard. Not because I thought she'd care, but because for years I trained myself to keep offering pieces of my day as proof that I was still worth being part of hers. And when I paused and didn't send it, something in me relaxed. It wasn't rejection, it was release. Instead, I just looked at the flower. Really looked at it. The color, the curve, the way it bloomed quietly with no audience, no camera, no applause. And I thought, that's what I want to be now, something that grows anyway. With or without acknowledgement, I started walking every morning, early, before the world fully woke up. The same streets I'd driven for years now looked different on foot, slower, more honest. I'd nod to other walkers, pet the occasional dog, sometimes stop at the small bakery run by a woman named Elsie who always wore bright scarves and remembered my name after just 2 visits. We started talking, then sharing tables. Then she invited me to her weekly gathering of women who got tired of waiting to be invited. It was a simple idea. Every Sunday evening, a group of women around my age met at someone's house. No big agenda, just food, wine, and stories. And let me tell you, those evenings healed me more than any therapy session ever could. There was laughter, yes, but also truth. We spoke openly about how it feels to be forgotten. To be needed only in moments of crisis. To be praised for being strong when what we really wanted was to be held. And in every nod across the table, I felt less alone. One Sunday, after we'd all shared something we wished someone had told us at 30, I said, I wish someone had told me that being a good mother doesn't mean disappearing. That love isn't measured by how much of yourself you erase. The room went still, and then Elsie raised her glass and said, Amen to that. I didn't need validation anymore, but it was nice to know I wasn't the only one who had spent years chasing it. Back home, Melissa's life went on as usual, and mine did too, only now, they didn't revolve around each other. She called sometimes, visited when she had the time, but the difference was that I no longer dropped everything for her. If I had plans, I kept them. If I was tired, I said so. And when she asked me for help, I no longer felt that anxious need to say yes just to maintain a fragile peace. She noticed. I could see it in her eyes the day she brought the kids over and I offered them cookies but told her, calmly, that I wouldn't be babysitting that weekend because I had a retreat planned with the Sunday women. For a second, she looked like she might push. I could see the words forming, but instead, she just said, okay, Mom. That's fair. I smiled. Thank you. And that was it. No drama. No guilt. Just boundaries. Honest, calm, earned. At the retreat, I shared my story. I spoke of the dog sitting. The sudden trip to Greece. The Maldives. The silence that followed. And the reclamation of self I'd never expected but desperately needed. One woman cried while I spoke. Another held my hand. And I realized, yet again, that my story wasn't unique. It was just rarely told out loud. That retreat marked something permanent. A transition from healing to thriving. From waiting to choosing. I got back and rearranged my living room. Not because I needed a change of scenery, but because I was tired of arranging my space around where guests might sit. I started placing my comfort first, moved my favorite chair to face the window, hung art that made me feel something, put out blankets that felt like softness, not presentation. I started cooking just for myself again, not rushed meals, but intentional ones. Meals with music playing and wine poured and no one asking what's for dinner. I even booked a creative writing course at the community college. I hadn't written anything since high school, but something in me wanted to try, to find the voice I'd muted under years of usefulness. On the first day, the instructor asked us to write about a time we said yes to ourselves. I wrote about a dog, a plane ticket, and a woman on a beach who stopped apologizing for taking up space. And for the first time in years, my hand didn't hesitate on the page. The most surprising part of starting over at nearly 70 isn't the changes in your schedule or even your relationships, it's the silence. The kind that settles in when you no longer fill your hours chasing recognition. It's not loneliness. It's not absence. It's a silence that feels like exhale. Like a part of you finally stopped shouting to be seen. I used to think my worth depended on how often I was needed, how quickly I could respond, how flexible I was willing to be. Now, I measure worth by how deeply I live inside my own days. I wake when I want to. I walk without a destination. I say no without a justification. I say yes only when it feels true. I read books that don't have a moral. I listen to music from my 20s and dance in the kitchen without worrying if the windows are open. I write letters I never send, just to get the words out of me. I no longer explain myself to people who've only ever looked at me through the lens of what I could do for them. Melissa still calls, and I still answer, most of the time. But our conversations have changed. She's quieter now, less directive. Sometimes I wonder if she's starting to realize that her mother isn't made of unending availability. That I am not a role she gets to assign and reassign at will. That I am, finally, a person outside the borders of her convenience. A few weeks ago, she invited me to dinner. Nothing fancy, just the family and some friends. I said no. Not because I had other plans, but because I didn't want to go. I didn't feel like being around the people who used to ask me to clean up, or help with the kids, or fetch another bottle of wine while they talked around me like I was part of the furniture. I wanted a night to myself. And that reason was enough. So I said, thank you, but I think I'll stay in. And when she asked, everything okay? I said, more than okay. I'm just choosing a quiet evening. She paused, then said, that sounds kind of nice. And I could tell, she meant it. That night, I lit candles, made pasta from scratch, watched a documentary on women who hiked the Appalachian Trail in their 60s. I took a long bath. And when I crawled into bed, I thought, I am not missing out. I am no longer waiting for inclusion. I am no longer counting how many times I've been invited versus how many times I've been needed. This life I've carved out, it's not glamorous. It's not broadcasted, but it's mine, and it's full. Sometimes I still think about that trip to the Maldives. How one spontaneous decision, one yes to myself, was enough to unravel a whole lifetime of habit. I think about the woman I was the night before I booked that trip, sitting on the couch, dog asleep beside me, scrolling through photos of a family I raised that no longer saw me. That woman didn't think she had any power left. She thought this was just how it would be, slowly aging into invisibility, clinging to crumbs of acknowledgement like they were blessings. But that woman changed, and the one I am now knows this. Power isn't something someone gives you. It's something you reclaim when you stop asking for permission. I used to walk into rooms and scan for ways I could be helpful. Now I scan for whether I want to stay. I used to say yes because I thought declining meant I was selfish. Now I know that selfishness is just the name some people give to women who finally stop being doormats. My days are smaller now, but they're richer. I find joy in things I used to overlook, the way the wind sounds in the pines behind my house, the feeling of new sheets, the weight of a book I don't have to finish, the warmth of tea brewed slowly on the stove instead of zapped in a microwave. I no longer speed through life trying to stay relevant. I've made peace with being irrelevant to people who only valued me for what I could provide. I am no longer in service. I am in self. And there is more light in that than I ever imagined. The final test didn't come as a loud confrontation or some dramatic crisis. It came in the form of a phone call on a Wednesday afternoon while I was elbow deep in a lemon tart recipe I had never tried before. I just zested the peel, the air was filled with this bright, citrusy calm, and the sun had just started its lazy descent into evening when the screen lit up with her name, Melissa. My instinct wasn't panic anymore. That's how I knew I'd grown. I didn't drop the zester or wipe my hands frantically or feel that old rush of tension curl in my stomach. I simply washed my fingers, dried them on a towel, and answered the phone when I was ready. Her voice was tight, rushed, not frantic exactly, but teetering. "Mom, I know it's last minute, but we've had a situation. Ryan's father had a heart episode, and we're flying out tonight. Can you keep the kids for the weekend?" I stood there in my quiet kitchen, crust chilling in the fridge, and felt the moment stretch like taffy. I could hear the assumption in her voice. The way she still defaulted to the old version of me. The one who said yes before even understanding the question. The one who cancelled plans, swallowed exhaustion, rewrote her whole weekend with a smile. But that woman wasn't here anymore. I didn't answer right away. I thought. I breathed. I checked in with myself. Did I want to? Could I handle it? Did I have the energy, the willingness, the desire? The answer that came was gentle, but clear. No. I said, "I'm really sorry about Ryan's dad, but I won't be able to take the kids this weekend." There was a pause. Not long, but sharp. "Wait, really?" she said, like she'd misheard. "Yes," I said, calm as still water. "I have plans." I didn't elaborate. I didn't justify. My plans were mine. My reasons were mine. She could fill in the blanks, or not. That wasn't my burden anymore. "Okay," she said eventually, voice clipped. "I'll figure something out." "I know you will," I replied, not with sarcasm, but with trust. Trust in her competence, not my obligation. When I hung up, I returned to my tart. Rolled the dough. Laughed a little to myself. Not out of cruelty, but out of release. I had said no. Not with anger, not with fear, not with regret. Just no. And the world didn't fall apart. That weekend, I went to the botanical gardens with a friend. We wandered through rows of blooming things. We talked about books and recipes and where we wanted to grow old. I didn't check my phone. I didn't feel guilty. I just lived. Later, I got a text from Melissa. A photo of the kids with their other grandmother. A simple caption, "We figured it out. Hope you're well." No passive aggression. No guilt trip. Just facts. And I realized something then. She was learning. Slowly, but learning. That I wasn't her safety net anymore. I was a person. A full person. A woman with a life. A life that didn't center around being someone's backup plan. I kept the photo, not because it made me feel included, but because it reminded me of something important. They could manage without me. They always could. The only difference now was that I believed it too. That was the final test. Not the call itself, but how I felt afterward. No tight chest. No pacing the room wondering if I'd done the right thing. Just a quiet knowing. The lemon tart turned out beautifully. And I ate it slowly, by myself, with the afternoon light spilling across the table, and a smile on my face that no one else needed to see for it to matter. It didn't happen all at once, this transformation. It came in waves, some small, some crashing. But one morning, I looked around my home, felt the stillness in my chest, and realized, I'm not waiting anymore. Not for the call, not for the apology, not for the invitation or the explanation or the long overdue recognition. I'm not waiting for my daughter to see me. I see me, and that is enough. I started putting myself in the photo, so to speak. All those years I was the one behind the camera, the one setting the table, picking up the cake, buying the candles, smiling from the edges of someone else's spotlight. Now I take up space in my own frame. I take photos with my books, with my messy garden, with a face softened by age but sharp with wisdom. And I don't delete them when no one else likes them. They're for me. I travel not because I'm running away, but because I'm arriving, again and again, in my own story. I spent so much of my life in the margins, writing chapters for everyone else's comfort. But now, the story is mine. Not to please, not to prove, but to live. My house no longer echoes with shoulds. It hums with want. I wake when I'm rested. I dress for how I feel. I answer the phone when I want to talk. I plan trips that excite me, not ones that fit someone else's schedule. I love my children. I always will. But I no longer parent out of guilt or fear. I don't manage their lives with invisible strings. I let go, with grace, with boundaries, with love that's no longer transactional. Melissa sees it now, not always clearly, not always comfortably. But she's started saying thank you, not just in passing, but from the heart. She brings me flowers sometimes, sends a photo when something reminds her of me. And once, not long ago, she looked at me across my kitchen table and said, "You seem happy." I smiled and said, "I am." She didn't ask me to explain. And I didn't need to. Because for the first time in a long, long time, that happiness wasn't conditional. It didn't hinge on anyone else's behavior. It wasn't fragile. It was mine. It came from every no I was once afraid to say. From every boundary I was told was too much. From every time I chose myself and the world didn't end. It came from a trip I booked when no one was looking. From a woman who sat on a beach alone and remembered she was not done yet. From a mother who became a woman again. And if there's one thing I hope someone hears in this story, it's this: you don't need permission to begin again. You don't need a round of applause to stop being invisible. You don't have to earn a damn thing, not rest, not space, not love. You are not too old. You are not too late. You are still here, and that means there is still time to choose yourself. I did, and I will never go back.